so cold today. Hello and welcome back to another episode of Notion Bonsai, and today we're going to be repotting a split trunk Cotoneaster bonsai that we worked on last year. So these are the trees that we're going to be working on here today. We have this little one in a little pot. It still has the berries on and leaves from the winter this year. I found this winter was very mild. We didn't get that many freezing temperatures and a berry just fell off, so maybe it's time they come off. We got the split trunk Cotoneaster, the main one of the video today, and we split this in a video last year. We just took a grafting knife to the top and hammered it down through the middle to create this somewhat of a unique design, more so as an experiment. As you can see, the tree is still alive and well. And finally, this smaller Cotoneaster. It has just started raining, so I've decided to put up this canopy while I film. Hopefully none of the rain blows in on the camera. And now the tools that I'll be using in this video today are some root pruning shears, gin pliers, wire cutters, a chopstick, root cutters, a bonsai root rake or a bent fork, and a toothbrush. And now by no means do you need any of these specialized bonsai tools. If you are just getting started in bonsai, you can get by with a regular pair of garden secateurs. Again, a bent fork or just an ordinary garden rake will work at raking away the soil. Chopsticks are pretty easy to come by. Just find whatever tool works for you, as long as the tools that you are using are clean and sharp, because whenever we use something like the root cutters and we cut through the roots, clean cuts on the roots will heal so much better and faster than a root that has been squashed by a blunt pair of scissors. If you wish to, you can take something like this. This is just a massive drip tray for a big pot, and this is what I'm going to be using to catch all of the soil when I do my repotting today, just so I don't make a mess on my table. And when it comes to repotting Cotoneasters like this one, repotting is best done every 2 years. I think it's been about 2 years since this one was repotted, but before you do a repot, what I like to do first is check the roots to see if they fill the pot. And as you can see here, we've got lots of healthy roots around the edges here. It hasn't completely filled the pot, so perhaps I could leave this another year in the pot. But if I do this, it could potentially fill the pot too much and become a little pot bound. So for the purposes of this, I'm going to repot this tree today. So I'm just going to start by taking the chopstick and raking away the top of the soil here. That rain is really coming down here today. And whenever I drag the chopstick across the soil, I'm working outward from the trunk in a radial pattern like this. Any type of root work that you do on trees, you generally want to work away from the trunk. The same goes for when you use something like a bent fork. You rake outward from the trunk. And I would say in the case of this tree, the bent fork would probably work better than the larger root rake, because this is quite a small tree. I'm going to take the tree, turn it on its side, making sure to be careful of the branches on top. The soil is probably going to be a little bit looser on the bottom here. And the same goes for working on the bottom of a tree. You want to work outward from the center. So as I take the bent fork like this, I'm just working outward. I come in this way, I'm working that way. Pretty easy to do. Turn the tree around. Again, working outward from the center. On the sides here, I'm just going to work down like this just to loosen up the roots. And although this soil is free draining with things in it, I would like to get this into some fresher soil today that has no compost in it at all. It does look quite aggressive what I am doing here, and many gardeners may say you shouldn't touch the roots like this on a tree, it will harm the tree or whatever, but I can assure you these roots are going to be quite fine. As we rake through them, we're not actually tearing the roots, we're just untangling them and loosening up the old soil. And whenever you work on roots like this, it may seem like it's impossible to untangle at first, but as you begin to loosen up some roots, everything sort of falls apart and it becomes really easy to rake away the old soil. And it is totally okay if you tear through some roots like this, because we are going to be pruning the roots anyway, so a little root loss isn't much of a big deal for the tree. So as you can see, I have raked away a good portion of the original soil. The base is flat, which is a really good sign. We've got that nice radial root growth. Now let's give these roots a wash, just to get rid of all the old soil that's on this. I'm gonna need to go out into the rain to do this one. Hopefully it doesn't take too long. So to wash the roots, I'm just taking a hose and blasting the roots. If your hose has different jet functions, you can play around with like the shower or the jet one. You can just jet the roots, just getting off all the old soil. All right, so now it is time to do some root work. We're going to remove some of the roots that we feel don't work in the design of the Nebari. And the Nebari is essentially the root spread on top of the surface level of the soil. And in bonsai, the Nebari is what makes the tree look stable and powerful in the pot. So what I would like to happen is, as the trunk comes down, it will flare out at the base. I don't want it to come down and then out, which kind of looks unnatural to me. Right away, as I look at this, I can see there's roots up here, and I feel that they're possibly a little too high. We will see. So I'm going to begin by just raking everything out in a radial pattern. It's okay if you tear through the ones that aren't growing radially, because we would probably get rid of them anyway. As you can see here, I feel these roots are a little too high. So I'm going to take the root pruning shears and get rid of them. You could make it into a feature, but I'm not the biggest fan of exposed roots like this. I just feel it looks out of place. These ones here, again, I feel are a little too high, so I'm going to remove them. This one's going at a weird angle, get rid of that. Now, it isn't really anything complicated that I'm doing. I'm just removing roots that I think personally don't look good. See here, this one, this would be a crossing root, how it's crossing over the trunk. And because we want all the roots going out, this root, because it naturally curls around, we can get rid of that. Now look at the trunk here, there's some roots that are curling inward. Let's see if we can rake this out. You can untangle it with your hand as well. There's a root here that I'd really like to bring attention to, because a scenario like this could really cause problems for some people. We know this doesn't belong here because as the trunk comes down, it goes straight out. Doesn't look quite natural. We want it to come down and flare out like this. So I'm going to remove this here. But for the sake of the tree's design, if, for example, you knew there was no roots below this and all the roots on this side of the tree were coming from this little part, then I would consider keeping this. But as a good test to see whether or not you need this or not, I'm going to isolate this root in this area with just a cloth and wrap the root over the cloth just to make it easier to see on camera. You can also do this if it makes it easier for you to make decisions. I would have instantly removed this root, but just for the purposes of the video, just so you can see really how much is attached to that root. There really isn't much, just a little bit there. So I'm going to take these root cutters and we're just going to cut that off. There we go. And now if we look at the trunk and we look at the flow of the tree, we come down and out, which is exactly what we want. So we've taken away that jagged line that sort of makes it unharmonious. And now when it comes to the size of the pot that you're putting your tree into, in bonsai, it usually comes down to two questions. Do I want to grow the tree larger and thicker with a faster growth rate? Or do I want to slow the tree down and treat it as a finished bonsai? In smaller pots, bonsai will grow so much slower. So with this tree, I don't want to put it back into this little bonsai training pot, because I feel not only am I restricting the radial part of the roots as I put this in, it's forced to a rectangular shape where I want the roots to grow evenly in all sides. So for that reason, I'm going to put it into a slightly larger pot. I could put it into a Japanese training pot like this, but I feel the roots are a little bit too big for this pot. The top of it, you see they're hitting the edges. So I have another solution here, which is a bowl that I have drilled a hole in the bottom of and put some bonsai mesh in there. And as you can see, this has a slightly larger diameter. This is how it's going to sit in the pot, but there is some roots that's still a little bit too long. And because this was in a rectangular pot before, there is longer roots on this side and this side from when it was a rectangle. So just to put balance in the roots, I'm going to shorten these longer ones that are curling. Same on this side, just so that the roots are the same length from the trunk the whole way around. And don't be afraid to cut roots, you know, there's some here on top that I still feel are a little bit misplaced, so we can get rid of that. Cotoneasters are pretty okay when it comes to root pruning. They can handle this type of thing. And that now I feel is a nice fit. So to prepare the pot, I'm going to turn this over and I'm going to take some bonsai wire, and then I'm going to cut a little bit extra. Because this pot has one hole, we're going to have to wire this a little differently. There's many different ways of wiring one hole, but the simplest method I found is just laying the wire across the hole like that, and then just putting the wire through the mesh. So I'm just going to hold this here with my finger like this, and pull this wire through. And as long as you keep the tension, that wire will keep it there. You can just pull it to the edges of the bowl to hold it in place. And the soil mix that I'll be using in this video today is a mix of pumice, akadama, lava rock and zeolite. If you can't find zeolite, you can also use just a mix of pumice, akadama and lava rock. There isn't much difference. And if you don't have bonsai soil like this, of course you can use some compost and perlite. Just something to give the trees good drainage. In the bottom of this pot, just so the substrate doesn't fall through the holes, I'm starting off with much larger particle size. And then I'm switching to a finer grit bonsai soil. If I plant this tree on here as it is, the tree will begin to grow roots out of the bottom, which I think is a waste of energy. I would much rather the tree put more energy into growing radial roots. So I'm going to use a trick that I seen from Dave at Blue Sky Bonsai. I'm just going to place a rock in the middle to prevent roots growing that way. So when the roots do grow, they grow in a nice pattern over the rock. I'm just going to shimmy this down. And the tree will go something like this. Let me see if I can get this a little bit further down. The roots will be bent down like this. I'm going to use the wire, making sure not to crush any of the roots as they come over with it. I'm going to come over with the wire like this, and I'm going to cross the wire over. I really want to secure this tree in place, so making sure it's at the right angle again. I'm going to grab the gin pliers, and I'm not going to tighten this fully quite yet. Just going to tighten it enough to hold the tree in place. And now we can go in with more substrate. I could do with a second piece of wire to hold this in. I mean, there is no rush in bonsai. I just took it apart, put up a second piece of wire, and now we can just wire this in again. Then I'm just going to tighten this second piece of wire to hold the tree even more secure. Now I'm just going to take a chopstick and work the soil into the pot in between all the roots, making sure the roots have contact with lots of soil. All we really want to do here is work out any air gaps, because when we water this, if there's any air gaps or pockets in the soil, that's essentially areas where water cannot reach. So if there's any roots there, they will dry out and die. So you really want to take your time and take all the time it needs to work out all the air gaps. You can also use this as a way to position the tree in the pot. So if you think it's leaning too much to one side, you can pull the tree in that direction and stuff soil under the area. So whenever you let it go, it doesn't spring back as much. You can work a little bit more here. And that's why we don't fully tighten the wire till the end. I'm going to leave the wire sticking up like this. I'm not going to cut it, because in a few weeks time I'll be removing this wire as the roots begin to grow and the tree is able to keep itself stable in the pot. And you leave it long like this, it just makes it easier to undo. And now moving on to the main tree, the split trunk tree. Let's get this out of the pot. As you can see, this has never been repotted since I got it. It's still in quite a composty soil, and I'd like to get it out of that pretty early this year. One of the best times to repot Cotoneaster is early spring, as it is right now, so this is just the perfect timing. I feel like if I leave it in this pot any longer, the roots could begin to rot and the health of the tree would suffer as a result. So let's get at this. I'm going to take the root rake, just rake outward from the trunk, and the soil's pretty loose. In spring, Cotoneasters grow these little lovely white flowers. You don't want to repot after flowering. If your Cotoneaster is already flowered, it's best to leave it until the next year. So I'm just raking around the roots here, and it is starting to get pretty tough as I get to the center. Some big roots here I can feel. And whenever you get trees like this, especially when they're from garden centers and you're raking through the soil, I find it's best to inspect the soil as you go along to make sure that there's no grubs, because you don't know what could be in the soil in that area. There's once I bought a Fuji cherry, brought it into my garden, and then I had an outbreak of vine weevil because the grubs were living in the soil of the tree. And vine weevil actually can eat the roots of your trees, and in worst case scenarios they can kill some trees. So it's good just to inspect the soil as you go along. It's so dense in this area, as you can see. It's like a mat of roots across here. So when it comes to things like this, I just like to rake down like that, because these roots are probably going to be lost in the process anyway after we prune the roots, so that's okay. Going at the roots like this, I'm not dragging down the whole way with each time I hit the roots. I'm sort of jabbing it in a motion like this going like that, but with each jab pulling down slightly. So you're almost like doing many scoops, and I find that's a good technique to loosen it up easier. Now with the chopstick, I'm just trying to loosen up some of the old soil in here because I'm really trying to untangle these roots by hand. So if I find a root like that, I'm pulling it to see where it ends. There's the end of it there. But before you can actually pull it, you got to get rid of the soil around it, so that way it pulls out nice and easily. So just loosen it up with some chopsticks, spin it around, see if I can find a big root. There's one. See if we can pull this one out. It came out okay. So I feel pretty happy about how much that I have raked off of this. I'm gonna give these a wash. And we're here with the root ball. As you can see, it's quite a mess, as most trees are. If you see that your tree looks quite crazy and it doesn't have the nice radial root pattern that you've seen in the last tree, don't panic, it's completely normal for a first repot. So right off the bat, I'm gonna get rid of any thick roots that are winding. If I take off quite a good bit, I'm not too worried. I know it will grow back. So we got some roots off here. That's quite a thick winding root. Another one is over here, and I'm gonna go in like this to get rid of it. So all I have done is remove all the crazy thick roots that I think are a little bit unnecessary. Remember, when it comes to trees, the thicker roots don't actually feed the tree and provide water to the foliage as much as the thinner roots do. These thinner roots are known as fine feeder roots. For that reason, they're the ones that feed the tree the most. So you could really take off every single thick root, and as long as you still have these fine feeder roots, the tree will do quite fine. I'm just going to fix up the bottom of this tree because there is quite a stump there. There's quite a knob at the bottom of this. I'm going to take these root cutters and just chop it off. You may think, oh, you're cutting the trunk of the tree. Is it not going to die? This is completely fine to remove. It will actually improve root growth in this area. And even with the small amount of roots that I've left on this tree, I'm fairly confident that it will bounce back. These Cotoneasters are just super resilient. And although this doesn't look like a nice root spread, this is one step in the right direction to get it to look like a nice Nebari. Looking at the tree, when this is in a pot, the soil level will be here. It's not really conventional to have branches of the tree lower than the soil level. So for that reason, I'm just gonna cut these a little bit higher. Do the same with this one and this one. That's a little bit more proportional. Not gonna go crazy on the work on this tree today because we did quite a lot on the roots already. If you wish to, you can take these, make some cuttings, stick them into some hormone rooting powder, stick them into some soil, and they should root. Now because this tree has quite a flare out, I feel like a rectangular pot for this tree would look nice. That would be quite nice. Let's try ceramic bonsai pot. That would look really nice in a few years' time once we get the roots developed, but right now, putting it into this wouldn't really help the roots of the tree at all. It would look nice, it would look great for a while, but we really want to get these roots growing. And this one just has a little bit more space as a training pot, so I'm going to put it into this. Just out of curiosity, what about a circular one? That looks nice too, but I don't think it looks as good. If it is a hot and windy day when you're working on roots, I would advise to keep a spray bottle handy just to mist the roots with some water as you work on them so they don't dry out. Because if the roots of your tree dry out, they essentially die and you can end up killing your tree just by not keeping them hydrated. But because it's so humid for me here today and rainy, I don't really need to mist them. They've just stayed consistently wet the whole time. So to prepare the pot, this is a plastic training pot. It's got lots of holes in the bottom. For this, I'm still using the same soil mix. I'm not going to put a stone under this one as I want root growth in all directions just to get the tree healthy for the first 2 years. So I'm just going to put this in here like this. And as you can see on the tree, we put a piece of a bamboo chopstick in the middle to keep this tree separated, to give it that Y shape. But if I take this out now, it should stay in place like that. More soil. Just as a precaution to keep the soil nice and humid and moist so it doesn't dry out on a hot sunny day, I'm just going to cover the top layer of this soil with some sphagnum moss. And I am pretty happy with how this has turned out. I think it looks quite proportional in this pot. And I would just like to say, In the last video I did on this tree, whenever I split it down the middle, on some of the other Cotoneaster trees, I was using cut putty to help heal over certain areas of that tree. And a lot of you guys asked, why did you not put cut putty on the inside of the split here? And this is mainly because I don't want this part of the tree to heal over. I want to keep and show off the bare wood on the inside. I think it looks a little bit nicer. And in the future, I will of course cover this in some lime sulfur just to help preserve and whiten that area. I'm going to come back to this tree later in the year and style the branches and give it a better shape with some wire. But we do have one more tree to repot, and I find this tree is quite interesting because whenever I repotted this, I wasn't that experienced in repotting bonsai, and I sort of took it out of the old pot, plopped it in, and around it put some bonsai soil, hoping that would help the tree out. I don't think this is the case. I feel like it's starting to get sort of pot bound in the middle of here. So let's just pry this open and see, because there is wire. Let's see if we can take that out first. Right, so I guess my idea of putting some fresh soil around the edge did work in growing lots of roots, but it didn't improve the overall structure of the roots because on the inside here, it hasn't been worked on at all. Maybe my initial thought was to just get the tree healthy before doing extreme root work. One of my favorite things about bonsai is not anyone knows all there is to know about bonsai. You're always learning, no matter what stage of learning you're at. And with this little tree, I don't want it to get any thicker. I want to treat this tree almost like a Mame size tree. I really like the size that it's at. And if I could keep it this small, but develop some ramification and some sort of canopy on the top here, I think it would look really nice. And this little cut that I've covered with some cut paste will just continue to heal. I think I could go and put this into this little small pot. Let's see how it would look in there. The roots are a little bit cramped now that I see it like this, and I don't think the tree would be happy in there. Let's try this little blue pot. Ah, the tree's a lot happier in there, a lot more room. If we cut the roots back just ever so slightly more, the tree will have lots of room to grow in. Upon further thought, it still doesn't look like the tree would grow. It would stop, and I do want the Nebari to get a little bit better on this. Although the height of the tree is where I want it, the Nebari still needs to improve, so I need a wider pot, like a wider diameter. I might just go with a Japanese training pot. Yeah, I'm gonna go with that. That feels right, just to get the Nebari looking good first. And with that, I'm pretty happy with how this tree looks. In terms of fertilization, I would say to hold off fertilizing these trees until another 3 or 4 weeks time, just until the roots begin to establish in the pot, because newly pruned roots will burn from fertilization. And again, I'm just going to take these last 2 trees here. I know I've covered this one in sphagnum moss. I'm also going to cover these ones in some sphagnum too. And the moment you see some new growth on the tops of these trees, take the sphagnum off, because the roots will begin to grow up into the moss, and we don't want that. We want the roots to grow nice and down. on that, I'm going to end off this video right here. If you enjoyed, please be sure to leave a like in this video. It really helps out the channel a lot with the YouTube algorithm. And let me know what you thought of this video down in the comments below. Is there anything you would have done differently? I'm always open to new and different ideas in bonsai. If you would like to support me and the things that I do on this channel, hit the thanks button down below. If you would like to become a channel member, hit the membership button. That way you'll be able to see videos before they go out to everyone else. And I'm going to be repotting a lot soon because it's spring right now and I'm not going to film every single repot that I do. So if you would like to see the things that I do off camera, please follow me on Instagram. It's @NotionBonsai. That way you'll be able to see all the things that I do on there. But on that, thank you so very much for watching.